Rancher heard the cry in the storm until the Bigfoot saved his life. Ep 2. The storm came hard that night. Thunder rolled across the valley and the rain hit the earth like it was trying to wash something away. I was locking the barn when I heard that cry. Deep, raw, not human, but familiar. I followed the sound through the storm, past the broken fence, past the fear that once ruled me. And there, beneath the pines, I found him, the creature they call Bigfoot. Wounded, bleeding, alone. I should have walked away, but I didn't, because somehow I knew what it felt like to be hunted. When the hunters came for him from my land, the storm answered back, and that night I learned the truth. Sometimes the wild doesn't try to take your life, it tries to save it. Before we begin, take a moment to comment the name of your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And when the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. The storm hit hard that night, the kind that makes the land feel alive and angry. Lightning cracked across the sky, lighting up the Washington highlands in brief, violent flashes. The wind screamed through the broken fences of the ranch, and rain slammed against the wooden boards like fists. Inside the barn, James Harlo fought the door's closed shoulders, straining against the storm's fury. The hinges groaned. His lantern flickered shadows cutting across the room. Then through the thunder it came a cry. Deep, raw, familiar. He froze. The sound wasn't human, yet it carried something that pierced through the noise, fear, maybe pain. His heart hammered. Lantern trembling in his hand, James stepped into the downpour, boots sinking into mud. Each flash of lightning guided him closer until he reached the creek. There, half buried in rain and earth, lay the impossible. Bigfoot, the same creature that once dragged a woman to safety, now broken and bleeding beneath the storm. For the second time in his life, James stood face to face with the wild, and it was asking for help. Part 1. The storm's witness. Rain hammered the tin roof like a relentless drum, each strike echoing through the hollow ribs of the old barn. The wind howled outside, bending the pines until they creaked like old bones. Inside, the air smelled of wet hay iron and blood. James Harlo staggered through the half-open door, soaked to the skin, his breath ragged. Behind him, dragged by both arms, was the massive, motionless form of the creature he'd found by the creek. Mud and rainwater streaked its fur, its chest heaving in shallow bursts. He kicked the door shut and dropped to his knees, gasping. For a long moment, all he could hear was the storm's roar and the heavy rhythm of his own heartbeat. Then, another sound. Footsteps. Clara appeared at the doorway to the barn holding a lamp. Her eyes widened as the light fell upon the hulking figure sprawled on the floor. "James!" she whispered, voice trembling. What is that?" He didn't look up. "Help me! Help you," she said, stepping closer, her face pale. "You're not serious. You're bringing that thing here." James glanced at her eyes, sharp in the flickering light. "It's bleeding. It's dying." Clara shook her head in disbelief. "And you're helping it." He hesitated, his voice low but certain. "It helped us first." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The rain pounded louder like a wall of sound, closing them in. Clara's lamp shook in her hand as she took a step closer. The creature's fur glistened in the light dark red where the wound cut deep into its side. James grabbed a ragged towel from a barrel and a half-empty bottle of whiskey from the shelf. He poured it over the gash. The smell of alcohol and iron filled the air. The creature flinched, muscles twitching under its thick skin, but it didn't move otherwise. James worked quickly, his hands steady, though his mind was a storm of its own. He tore a strip from an old shirt, pressing it into the wound to slow the bleeding. Clara crouched beside him, her fear warring with something else, something like pity. "What if it wakes up?" she asked quietly. "Then we'll deal with it," he said. "But if we leave it, it won't make it till morning." She swallowed, her eyes tracing the shape of its massive hand, larger than her head fingers, thick and calloused, the nails dark and chipped. Yet there was something oddly human about the way it rested open and still, palm facing upward as if in surrender. James pressed the bandage tighter, the fabric turning dark with blood. "Whoever shot it used a rifle," he murmured. "Same caliber as the ones those hunters carried last month." Clara looked toward the window where lightning lit up the fog outside. "You think they're back?" Before he could answer, a crack of thunder shook the barn. The creature groaned, a low, guttural sound that reverberated through the wooden walls. Clara flinched backward. "It's alive. Of course it's alive," James said, still focused on the wound. "That's the problem." The creature's chest rose and fell. A deep rumble built in its throat, a sound not of pain, but of instinct, a warning. James froze, hands still pressing down. The lantern flame flickered violently, shadows leaping across the walls. Clara's breath hitched. "James, I know," he whispered. "Easy now." The sound faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of rain. The creature's breathing evened slightly. Minutes passed. The storm outside raged on, but inside time seemed to slow. Clara's fear softened into something else as she studied its face, broad-lined with scars half hidden beneath a curtain of wet hair. There was power there, yes, but also exhaustion, pain, and something deeply human. She reached out before she realized what she was doing. Her fingertips brushed its arm, rough fur cold and damp beneath her skin. The creature didn't move, didn't growl, just breathed. For the first time that night, the barn was silent. James finally sat back, wiping his hands on a rag, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion. "It's stable," he muttered. "For now." Clara exhaled shakily. "I can't believe this. You're risking everything for it." He turned to her, his face drawn but resolute. "Clara, you saw what it did last time. It could have killed us, but it didn't. It carried you out of that forest when I couldn't even move. It saved your life." Clara's eyes flickered. The memory was still raw, the fog, the cold, the massive figure emerging from the mist, carrying her to safety. "I remember," she said softly. "Then you know why I can't just let it die." Thunder cracked again, closer this time. The wind howled, rattling the loose boards on the walls. James poured another splash of whiskey over the wound, then covered it with a strip of burlap. Clara stood and walked toward the door, peering into the darkness outside. "The rain's getting worse," she said. "You think the hunters are still out there?" James didn't answer. He was staring at the creature's hand, massive, scarred, and now twitching slightly. "James." He held up a hand, listening. There it was again. Beneath the thunder, faint but unmistakable dogs barking. Far away but closing in. The sound grew louder, carried by the wind. James's stomach clenched. He glanced toward the rifle leaning against the wall. "They're tracking it," he said grimly. Clara turned back, eyes wide. "Here." He nodded slowly. "They must have seen the blood trail before the storm covered it." The creature stirred again, a low growl vibrating in its chest. The sound wasn't aggressive, it was instinctual, a signal of danger, the same way a man might mutter a prayer before a fight. James looked toward the door, then at the creature. His decision was already made. "We'll keep it quiet," he said. "We'll wait it out. If they come this way, and if they don't—" Clara interrupted, her voice trembling. "Then we see what it does when it wakes up." The rain intensified, drumming harder on the roof. Water trickled down through the cracks, pooling beneath the straw. The lantern flickered low, the flame dimming to a trembling glow. James grabbed his rifle, checked the chamber, then set it down beside the creature. Clara stared at him. "You're trusting it." He met her eyes. "No," he said. "I'm trusting what it did." The growl from the creature faded into a slow, heavy breath. Outside, the barking came closer, then stopped. For a few seconds, the world held still. Even the wind seemed to pause. James moved to the door, peering through a crack in the wood. The rain blurred everything into shadow. Then flashlight beams slicing through the darkness like knives. Voices. "Over here," someone shouted. "The blood leads this way." Clara's face drained of color. "They'll find us." James pressed a finger to his lips. "Not if the storm keeps them blind." The creature shifted again, its breathing ragged but steady. Then it exhaled a deep, shuddering sound that rolled through the barn like thunder. A warning. The dogs outside started barking again, louder this time. James felt his pulse quicken. "They're close," he whispered. He reached for his rifle. Clara blew out the lantern, plunging them into darkness. And as the last flicker of light faded, only the sound of rain and the creature's low, steady growl filled the silence. The storm had found its witnesses. Part 2. The Hunter's Trap. The storm raged over the forest like a living thing, all breath and fury and noise. Wind tore through the trees, bending them until their branches clawed at the sky. The rain came down in sheets, washing mud into streams that snaked between the roots. And through it all, a dozen torchlights burned, wavering like angry spirits in the night. Hunter Briggs pushed through the thickets, his boots sinking deep into the muck. He was a man carved out of bitterness, broad-shouldered, weathered and driven by something darker than survival. Lightning flashed, catching the metal of his rifle, the scar that ran from his jaw to his ear. Spread out, he shouted over the wind. The beast's clothes, the tracks are fresh. His men fanned out their shadows, splitting across the wet ground. Some carried rifles, others ropes and snares. Every so often a dog barked, straining against its leash nose to the earth. The air stank of gunpowder, wet fur, and greed. Briggs crouched beside a tree where the mud was torn up, a massive footprint, half filled with rainwater. He touched the edge with his fingers and smiled grimly. "He's bleeding," he muttered. "Not far now." One of the younger hunters, a boy no older than 20, glanced around nervously. "Sir, what if it's headed toward the ranch?" The old man, Briggs, cut him off with a glare. "Then we'll smoke it out. That ranch sits on land my family should have had years ago. If Harlo wants to hide the beast, he'll burn with it." Lightning cracked overhead, throwing their faces into sharp relief, men hardened by loss, anger, and fear of the unknown. "Move," Briggs barked. "Circle wide. Set the traps along the ridge. If it doubles back, we'll corner it by the creek." They moved like shadows, slipping through the trees, setting steel snares in the mud, planting sharpened stakes hidden beneath leaves. The rain hissed against their torches, but still they pressed on. Further back, half hidden behind a tangle of brush, Clara watched. She'd followed the sound of their shouting from the barn, ignoring James's warning to stay inside. Her cloak clung to her like a second skin, soaked through heavy and cold. She crouched low, heart pounding as the men passed just yards away. Their words were carried on the wind, half lost to the storm, but enough reached her to freeze her blood. "He's hiding it," Briggs said. "You saw the tracks, they end right at his property line." "What if the beast kills him first?" another man asked. Briggs laughed a sound without warmth. "Then the problem solves itself. Either way, when this is over, the ranch is ours. The county won't argue once we've cleaned up the mess." Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Her heart hammered in her chest. They weren't just hunting the creature, they were planning to take everything. She pressed deeper into the brush, careful not to make a sound. The rain masked most of her movement, but the dogs were restless. One lifted its head, ears twitching. Briggs noticed. "What is it, boy?" The hound growled low, pulling at its leash. Its nose pointed straight toward where Clara hid. Panic rose in her throat. She froze, barely breathing. "Probably a deer," one man said. "Ain't nothing else moving in this weather." But Briggs wasn't convinced. He took a step forward, rifle raised, eyes narrowing into the dark. Clara pressed her back against the cold ground, feeling the mud seep through her clothes. The rain stung her face. She dared not move. Another flash of lightning lit the forest, and for a split second she saw his face, cruel and calculating, scanning the brush. "Hold him," Briggs said, finally tugging the dog back. "We'll deal with it later. The beast comes first." He turned away, and Clara exhaled the breath trembling out of her like smoke. The men disappeared into the trees, their torches fading one by one into the mist. She waited until the last echo of their boots vanished, then pushed herself up, shaking. Her whole body was shaking from fear, from cold, from the enormity of what she'd just heard. She turned and ran. The forest blurred around her branches, whipping at her face, rain blinding her eyes. Mud sucked at her boots as she stumbled through the undergrowth. She didn't care. The only thought in her mind was James needs to know. Back at the ranch, the storm was even worse. The wind had torn loose shingles from the roof, and the trees bent dangerously close to the barn. The lanterns inside flickered as if the night itself was trying to swallow the light. James sat beside the creature, his rifle resting across his knees. Bigfoot lay still, chest rising and falling in deep, uneven breaths. The wound looked worse now, blood dark against its matted fur. Every few minutes, James would glance toward the door, listening to the distant barks that grew fainter, then closer again. He didn't like it, the rhythm of the hunt closing in. Then faintly through the storm came another sound, Footsteps running fast. He stood, gun raised. "Who's there?" The barn door burst open, wind and rain spilling inside. Clara stumbled in, gasping for breath. "James," she cried. "They're coming." He crossed to her in 2 strides, gripping her shoulders. "What are you talking about?" "They're setting traps in the woods near the ridge. Briggs, he knows you're hiding it. He said when it's over, they'll take the ranch." James's jaw tightened. Damn it. Outside, a low rumble of thunder rolled across the valley. The lantern light flickered wildly. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "What do we do?" James looked toward the creature, its hand-twitching eyes still closed, but breathing steady. "We wait," he said finally. "We keep the lights low. If they come this way, we'll deal with it. But they'll find us," she said. "You can't fight all of them." James's eyes were hard, resolute. "I don't have to fight them all. I just have to keep them away long enough for it to live." Clara stared at him, this man who had once refused to help anyone, now risking everything for a creature the world feared. Before she could speak, a blinding flash split the sky. The thunderclap that followed shook the walls, rattling tools from the shelves. Then, with a hiss and a sharp pop, the lantern went dark. The barn was swallowed in blackness. For a moment, there was only the sound of rain and the hollow thud of her heartbeat. Then voices outside, spread out. "The tracks end here," Briggs's shout echoed over the wind. Clara's breath caught. "They're here," she whispered. James reached out, finding her hand in the dark. "Stay quiet," he said softly, "and pray the storm hides us a little longer." Lightning flashed again, illuminating the creature's still form, its eyes open now, faintly glinting in the dark. And for the first time that night, James realized the storm wasn't just hiding them. It was watching. Part 3. The Clash at the Fence. 1,000 words. The storm had reached its full fury. Thunder rolled over the valley like cannon fire, and lightning clawed across the sky in blinding veins of white. The rain came sideways now, driven by the wind, soaking everything in cold fury. Through the sheets of water, the dim glow of the barn lantern pulsed faintly, a fragile heartbeat in the dark. And moving toward it, their torches guttering in the rain, came Hunter Briggs and his men. "Fan out," Briggs bellowed. His voice carried over the storm like a whip crack. "The tracks lead straight to that barn. The beast is here." The dogs barked wildly, straining against their leashes. The men raised their rifles, eyes squinting through the downpour. Mud splashed up around their boots with every step. Inside the barn, James Harlo stood by the door, his rifle loaded, his breath steady despite the pounding in his chest. Clara clutched his sleeve. "They'll kill it," she whispered, "and they'll kill you too." James looked at her, his face calm but lined with something deeper than fear resolve. "Then I'll make sure they understand what they're killing first." He pushed the door open and stepped into the storm. The wind slammed into him like a wall. Rain stung his face, blurring his vision. The torches ahead wavered in the dark like restless ghosts. Briggs turned at the sound of boots in the mud. "Stay back," James shouted, his voice cutting through the wind. "You're not crossing this fence." Briggs barked a harsh laugh. "That's not your choice anymore, old man. You've been harboring it." "You think we don't know?" James leveled his rifle not at them, but at the ground between them. A warning, not a threat. "You're not hunting a monster," he said, his tone low and steady. "You're becoming one." For a moment, even the storm seemed to hold its breath. The lightning flickered, illuminating the 2 men facing each other across the broken fence, one consumed by vengeance, the other by something that almost looked like faith. Briggs sneered. "Faith doesn't bring back the dead. That thing took my brother. It ripped him apart." "I buried what was left." His voice cracked on the last word, but his rage hardened it again. "And you'd defend it." James's reply was quiet but fierce. "It saved my life." Briggs's jaw clenched. "You've lost your mind," maybe James said. "But I know what I saw. It had a chance to kill me, to kill Clara, but it didn't. It carried her through a blizzard. It left medicine by my door. You call that a monster?" The men behind Briggs shifted uneasily. The storm made the world feel unreal, the thunder drowning reason, the lightning cutting faces into pale masks. Briggs raised his rifle. "Step aside, Harlo." James stood firm. "You'll have to go through me first." The wind screamed through the pines. Rain lashed against the metal of the rifles, hissing as it hit the barrels. "Damn fool," Briggs muttered. He signaled to his men. "Move in. We'll smoke it out." James took a step forward, his boots sinking into the mud. "You shoot that barn," and I swear he didn't finish. A bolt of lightning exploded across the field, blinding everyone for an instant. The thunder that followed shook the ground itself. When the flash faded, something moved behind James, a shadow too large to be human. Gasps rippled through the hunters. Briggs's eyes widened as the figure stepped into the stormlight. Bigfoot! It filled the barn doorway, towering in silent rain streaming off its fur. The faint glow from inside caught in its eyes, not the red of a beast, but the deep, weary gold of something alive, aware. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The world shrank to the space between lightning strikes. Briggs's hand trembled on his rifle. God Almighty! The creature didn't advance. It simply stood there behind James, breathing hard but steady, its chest rising and falling like the rhythm of the storm itself. James didn't turn around. He didn't have to. He could feel it, the quiet presence, the heat of its breath mixing with the cold air. He lowered his rifle. "You see," he said to Briggs, voice soft but clear, "it's not here to kill anyone. It's hurt. It's tired. It just wants to be left alone." The younger hunters exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't sure what they were looking at anymore. The legends they'd been told as children, the monster in the woods, didn't fit what stood before them. But Briggs was beyond reason. His grief had turned to hatred long ago, and hatred needed a target. "It killed my brother," he growled. "You think I care what it wants?" He raised his rifle. "Briggs, don't!" James shouted. But the shot came anyway. The crack echoed through the storm, cutting the night in two. Birds burst from the trees, shrieking. The sound rolled across the valley like a scream. James flinched, not because he was hit, but because the creature behind him had moved. With a sound halfway between a growl and thunder, Bigfoot stepped forward, one massive arm sweeping out. The bullet had grazed its shoulder, a thin line of red against dark fur, but it didn't attack. Instead, it placed itself between James and the hunters. Its roar wasn't one of rage, but of warning, primal, powerful, shaking the very ground. Briggs stumbled backward, eyes wide. What in God's name? James turned slightly, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Now you see. It's not hunting us. It's protecting." Lightning flashed again. This time the full scene revealed the old fence between the men and the beast, splintered but still standing. James soaked and defiant, his rifle lowered. Bigfoot towering and silent, guarding him like a sentinel of the wild. For the first time, Briggs hesitated. His finger wavered on the trigger. The men behind him didn't move. Thunder rolled again, but softer this time, as if even the storm was waiting to see what would happen next. The creature turned its head, meeting Briggs's eyes, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not even understanding, but truth. It took a step back, its shadow retreating into the barn light. James looked over his shoulder, rain streaming down his face. "Go," he said quietly, "before this storm takes more than it already has." For a moment no one moved, then Briggs lowered his gun. "Come on," he muttered to his men. "We're done here." They began to retreat, torches flickering through the rain, swallowed one by the dark. James stood there for a long while, the storm easing around him. The wind shifted softer now. The rain slowed. Behind him the barn creaked. He turned. Bigfoot still stood there, shoulders slumped, breath heavy. The wild had stood its ground, not to conquer, but to protect. And James Harlo, the man who'd once feared the silence of the frontier, finally understood what it meant to belong to it. Part 4. The Saving Hand. The world had turned to fire and rain. The clearing that separated the forest from the ranch glowed in flickering shades of orange and blue torchlight clashing with lightning. Smoke rose where wet branches hissed under the flames, curling around the men like living things. The wind howled through the trees, snapping banners of smoke and sparks into the air. The earth itself seemed to tremble beneath the weight of what was about to happen. James Harlo stood at the center of it all, his rifle heavy in his hands, his boots sinking in the mud. Behind him, the barn door hung open. Inside, Clara clutched the frame, watching through the downpour, her face pale in the strobing light. Across the field, Hunter Briggs barked orders over the wind. "Form up. Don't let it escape fire on my mark." The hunters raised their rifles. Rain beaded on the barrels, dripping down their arms. The torches hissed, spitting sparks as the wind fought to blow them out. And then, a low, shaking growl. From the edge of the barn, the ground itself seemed to move. Bigfoot stepped into the clearing, massive and wild rain streaming down its fur. Its breath came in hot clouds, its chest rising with the effort of every inhale. Briggs's eyes went wide. "There! Take it down!" "Don't," James shouted, stepping forward. "Stop!" But the gunfire came anyway. The first shot cracked through the storm, followed by another and another, flashes of orange slicing through the night. Bigfoot roared, the sound so deep it seemed to shake the rain itself. It slammed one massive hand into the earth, sending a spray of mud and water flying. The force of it knocked a few hunters backward. But it didn't attack. Instead, it crouched, arms sweeping wide, shielding James and Clara behind it. Bullets hit the ground around them, splintering wood and stone. "Stop!" James's voice broke with fury and fear. "Can't you see it's protecting us?" The storm swallowed his words. Briggs reloaded, shouting over the wind. "It's a trick! It's cornered fire again!" "No!" Clara screamed, her voice trembling. "You'll kill him!" Lightning split the sky in two, throwing every face into stark, ghostly relief. For one heartbeat, time froze, the creature kneeling like a guardian, its hand planted between the hunters and the humans it protected. The next heartbeat shattered it all. A gunshot rang out, closer, sharper. James jerked back, his hand flying to his arm. The bullet had grazed him, tearing through his sleeve. Blood mingled instantly with rain. James, Clara cried, rushing forward. He staggered, clutching his arm but staying on his feet. "I'm fine. Stay back." The creature turned at the sound of her voice. Its eyes, deep amber, alive, flicked from James to the hunters, then to the torches. The fire was spreading, catching the low brush near the fence. Briggs barked another command, raising his rifle. "End it now!" But before he could aim, the creature moved. It charged forward, a blur of strength and purpose, not toward the men, but toward the danger itself. With a sound like thunder, Bigfoot tore a burning tree from its roots and heaved it sideways, blocking the hunter's path. Sparks scattered like stars as the trunk crashed down, shaking the earth. The wall of fire cut off the clearing, dividing the two sides with a curtain of smoke. The hunters stumbled back, shielding their faces from the heat. Briggs cursed, coughing, his voice lost in the storm. "Hold your fire," one man shouted. "We can't see a damn thing." James stared through the haze, disbelief and awe mixing in his chest. "It's saving us," he whispered. Clara clung to his arm, eyes wide. Why would it do that? He didn't answer. He didn't know. Across the fallen tree, through smoke and rain, the creature stood tall. The flames painted it in gold and shadow. For a moment it looked like something out of myth. Not a monster, not a man, but a bridge between the two. It turned its head toward James. The stormlight caught in its eyes, soft and knowing. James took a step forward, voice breaking through the wind. "Go, get out of here." The creature hesitated. It looked at him for a long moment, as if memorizing the face of the only man who had ever stood for it. Then it nodded once, slow, deliberate. With that, it turned and disappeared into the fog beyond the flames. The wind shifted, carrying smoke into the trees. The fire hissed under the rain, dying in patches of steam. For a few seconds there was silence, only the sound of rain on leaves, the soft crackle of dying embers. Then the hunters moved again, stumbling back from the barricade. Briggs wiped the mud from his face, eyes scanning the tree line. "You let it go," he snarled. "You let it escape." James lowered his rifle, his breath shallow. "It wasn't escaping," he said quietly. "It was saving us from you, from this." Briggs's fury broke into something else, disbelief, then weariness. "You've lost it," he spat. "You're siding with a beast." James met his gaze through the rain. Maybe the beast's the only one who remembers what mercy looks like. For the first time, Briggs had no answer. He turned away, his men silent behind him. The fire between them burned low, its light fading to embers. James stood there long after they left the rain, washing the blood from his arm, the mud from his boots. The night seemed quieter now, the air heavy with something that felt like peace, or the closest thing to it the land had known in years. Behind him, Clara touched his shoulder. "Do you think it'll come back?" she asked softly. He watched the fog drift through the trees, the storm finally breaking apart. "No," he said. "I think it's done saving us." She nodded slowly, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. The two of them stood there in silence, the broken fence between them and the forest, the last line between man and legend, half mended, half destroyed, and utterly changed. Somewhere deep in the woods, the faint sound of movement echoed once heavy footsteps receding into the mist. James listened until it was gone. The wild had shown its hand not to strike but to save, and as the storm eased into stillness, he realized that maybe the wild wasn't something to fear after all. Maybe it was the only part of the world still capable of forgiveness. Part 5. The Dawn of Two Worlds. Morning came slowly to the valley as if the world itself was afraid to wake. The storm had passed, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt sacred. The wind had gone still, the rain had stopped, and the land, washed clean by the night, glistened under a thin veil of mist. The first light of dawn slipped between the pines, pale and silver. Steam rose from the earth, curling into ghostly shapes that drifted through the air. Every drop of water on every blade of grass caught the light, turning the field into a quiet ocean of glass. James Harlo stood at the doorway of the barn, his arms still wrapped in a bloodied bandage. His eyes were red from exhaustion, but he didn't move for a long while. The world before him looked both new and ancient, as if something had changed in the soil itself. Behind him, Clara slept in a chair by the hearth, the last embers of the fire still breathing a faint orange glow. He glanced back once, then stepped outside, the boards creaking softly beneath his boots. The air was cool, heavy with the scent of pine and wet earth. Every breath felt like the first after drowning. He walked past the broken fence where mud and ash still marked the night's battle. The torches were gone now, just charred sticks half buried in the ground. Birds had returned their hesitant songs, threading through the mist like fragile ribbons of sound. He followed the path toward the forest's edge, where the grass grew thick and wild again. Each step carried him deeper into the hush, his boots leaving faint prints in the soft ground. And then he saw it. Just beyond the last fence post, where the land dipped gently toward the woods, lay a circle of stones, small, smooth, and perfectly arranged. The kind of circle that took time, patience, and purpose. At its center lay something else, a tuft of dark fur, damp but clean, resting on a piece of bark carved with a rough symbol. James knelt, his breath catching in his throat. The stones were still wet from the rain, but not scattered. They'd been placed deliberately, carefully. He reached out, fingertips brushing one of them, and felt the faint warmth of life lingering in the cold. It wasn't just a mark. It was a message. Clara approached quietly from behind, her voice soft. "What is it?" He didn't look up. "A sign," he murmured. "Not of goodbye, but peace." She stepped closer, eyes tracing the circle. "You think it made this?" He nodded slowly. "It's not the first time. It left something like this before, after it saved you." Clara knelt beside him. The mist swirled around them, pale and gentle. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would it keep helping us?" James smiled faintly, though his eyes were distant. "Maybe it doesn't know any other way. Maybe that's what keeps it alive, protecting something it doesn't understand." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The forest whispered softly, the sound of leaves of water dripping from branches of a world remembering how to breathe again. James reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his old notebook. He turned to a blank page, his hand trembling slightly, and wrote, "The forest speaks in silence. Some call it wild, some call it dangerous. But I think it's just waiting for someone to listen." He closed the book and looked toward the trees. The mist hung thick between the trunks, glowing faintly in the newborn light. "I used to think peace meant being alone," he said quietly. "Now I think it means being understood." Clara watched him, the hint of a smile touching her lips. Maybe that's what it wanted too. He nodded, still staring into the fog. Maybe we're not so different. A soft breeze stirred the air, carrying the scent of pine and rain. The circle of stones shimmered faintly as the light grew stronger. Somewhere deep in the woods, a branch cracked, faint, distant, but unmistakable. James straightened, his heart quickening. His eyes searched the mist, every sense alert. Then he saw it. A shadow, vast and silent, moving between the trees. It wasn't walking like a predator or running like prey. It moved with purpose, steady and sure. The mist parted around it as though the forest itself made way. "James," Clara whispered. Is that he lifted a hand, silencing her. The shape paused at the edge of the trees. For a moment it stood there, half hidden, half revealed, like the meeting point of two worlds that weren't meant to touch. Then it turned its head slightly. Even through the fog, James could see the glint of light catching its eyes. He felt the same quiet understanding that had passed between them in the storm, something beyond words, beyond fear. Gratitude, perhaps. Recognition. He took a step forward, boots sinking softly into the mud. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "Guess we both just wanted peace. Didn't we?" For a heartbeat, the creature stood motionless. Then it dipped its head, a single slow nod. And before James could say another word, it turned and walked into the mist. The fog swallowed it whole, leaving nothing but the soft rustle of leaves and the circle of stones gleaming faintly in the morning light. Clara stood beside him, eyes wet. "Do you think it'll come back?" James smiled faintly, eyes still on the forest. "Maybe not. But it doesn't have to." The sun broke through the clouds, then painting the clearing in gold. The light touched everything, the barn, the fence, the trees, binding them in the same warmth. Two worlds once divided by fear, now quietly joined by understanding. James placed his hat over his heart and bowed his head slightly. "Thank you," he murmured to the wind. The breeze answered with a whisper through the pines, soft, low, almost human. He turned back toward the ranch, Clara walking beside him. Behind them, the mist began to lift the circle of stones, still glowing faintly in the sun. For the first time in years, James didn't feel the weight of loneliness pressing on his chest. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was alive. The forest no longer felt like something separate. It was part of him now. And somewhere in that great expanse of wilderness, a creature walked beneath the trees, scarred, ancient, and perhaps just as human as he was. The dawn had come, and with it, the fragile peace between two worlds that had finally learned to listen. Morning light poured softly through the cabin windows, painting the wooden walls in gold. The fire still glowed in the hearth, casting faint crackles that blended with the sound of birds outside. Clara slept on the couch, a blanket draped over her shoulders, her breathing calm, peaceful at last. At the table by the window, James Harlo sat with his old leather journal open. The pages were damp around the edges, smudged by rain and time. His hand moved slowly, pen scratching against paper as sunlight warmed the ink. "The forest isn't cruel," he wrote. "It just waits for someone to listen." He paused, gazing out the window. The light reached across the yard, touching both the repaired fence and the first line of trees beyond. For the first time, there was no boundary between them, only stillness and the soft hum of life shared. James leaned back in his chair. The man who once feared the silence of the wild now found peace within it. He understood now that the wilderness wasn't something to conquer or survive, it was something to understand. Outside, the mist was gone. The land was quiet, yet alive in every breath of wind. His voice, calm, low, and reflective, carried over the final image of the glowing forest. Sometimes the things we fear the most are the ones that teach us how to feel again. A soft guitar strummed under the closing words. This is Wild West Stories, where mystery meets mercy, and every silence heals. If a legendary creature saved your life in the storm, what would you do? Leave your answer below and rate today's story from 0 to 10.